This past week, an extremist organization in Israel began offering to pay people to sacrifice a lamb or goat on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as a way of commemorating Passover. This is an absolutely bizarre development, and it was illegal in many ways, and people got stopped by the police if they tried. And this was one that was likely motivated by right-wing politics as much as right-wing religion. This activity also coincided with multiple violent incursions by Israel's military on the Temple Mount, which is today home to Al-Aqsa Mosque, a center for Muslim prayer, especially during Ramadan. These events raise a question for me. What role does the Temple Mount actually play in our Jewish religious and cultural world today? If, as I'd imagine, most folks in this room agree the idea of animal sacrifice as Jewish practice is not something we want to be associated with, what is the particular importance of that one particular space? There are a couple competing threads throughout Jewish history about sacred space. We see it in the difference between the movable tabernacle used in the wilderness and in the land of Israel for centuries prior to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, which itself was destroyed in 586 BCE, rebuilt by the Persian Empire, and then destroyed again in 70 CE. We see it in the temple being referred to as eternally sanctified as God's dwelling place. And also, we see it in God's presence filling the whole world. We see it in the idea that the Holy Presence still dwells on the Temple Mount, and in the idea that the Holy Presence left the land of Israel with the exiles. We see it in the idea that we direct our prayer towards the land of Israel by facing east, to the memory of the Ark of the Covenant, which was lost millennia ago, and that we also ultimately direct our prayer to the divine in heaven. The seeming conflict has roots in the alternate Torah portion for the end of Passover. The portion speaks about Hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha l'shaken shmo, the place that God will choose in the future tense to make God's name dwell, which is the place in this Torah portion that the Passover sacrifice was to be offered. The future tense implies that God had yet to establish this place at the time that Deuteronomy was written. But most historical critics of the Bible believe that Deuteronomy was written well after the temple was constructed and was designed to look as though it were written directly by Moses centuries earlier, meaning that at the time of its composition, the location was already established. The shift towards God's dwelling place being the whole world occurred even after that point, in the lead-up and aftermath of the destruction of the first temple, and with the knowledge that the Israelites would need to still connect to God without the temple. We see here two different frames for looking at our relationship to God. One looking backwards, and one looking forwards. Gershom Scholem, one of the most important Jewish academics of all time who studied Jewish mysticism, saw this same conflict when talking about the Messiah and the Messianic era. Scholem saw these two impulses as restorative and utopian. He wrote, "Restorative forces are directed to the return and recreation of a past condition which comes to be felt as ideal. But there are, in addition, forces which press forward and renew. They are nourished by a vision of the future and receive utopian inspiration. They aim at a state of things which has never yet existed." We can see clearly in the impulse to sacrifice animals on the Temple Mount a desire to implement the restorative forces of Scholem, the desire to look backwards, to try to recreate a past that has been idealized today. But what of us here? Which do we focus on? As members of a synagogue that identifies as part of progressive Judaism, I'd have to assume our focus is that of the latter. The vision of a utopian future was core to the mission of Reform Judaism at its outset, and today sees itself expressed in our movement's commitment to Tikkun Olam. Through utopian inspiration, if God's presence fills the whole earth, God's presence then is certainly at the Temple Mount, but is also here with us now and everywhere. The relevance of the Temple Mount becomes that of a historical site, which once held the Ark of the Covenant. It is one of the key places in which the seeds of our current mode of Jewish practice and life were planted, nurtured, and blossomed. It therefore holds value insofar as it represents our roots and perhaps our future, but not our present. So what can we focus on instead? Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi of blessed memory once wrote, "To me, the sight of our Earth from outer space is not only a scientific triumph, but today's most potent religious icon as well. More than I want to talk about Avodat Hashem, serving God, I want to talk about serving the planet. The question is, can Judaism respond?" This, then, is where our utopian vision can and must focus. Yesterday, after all, was Earth Day, a day established to remind us all that we are part of the delicate interweaving of life on this planet, and it is our responsibility to maintain the balance of the biological lattice that supports us and all other living creatures. By listening to our ancestral call, Melo kol haaretz kavodo, the whole world is full of God's presence, we can reframe the Torah portion's designation of God's dwelling place towards a more constructive end. Where shall we serve God? Hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha l'shaken shemo, the place that God will choose, in the future tense, to make God's name dwell. And we, those who search for God in all places, can find God's name unfolding everywhere. For the name itself means the one who is in process of becoming. A midrash. When the Blessed Holy One created the first human, God took the human and led the human around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "Look at my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And all that I have created, it was for you that I created it. Pay attention that you do not corrupt and destroy my world. If you corrupt it, there is no one to repair it after you." If we today can find God's name dwelling within each piece of the world, rather than focusing on only one place, we can indeed make sure we do not corrupt the gift we were given. We can fulfill the mitzvah of Passover, not by sacrificing lamb or goat in the mode of our ancient ancestors, but by remembering our responsibility to care for the world and all its inhabitants, because we were cared for by God. For if we do not, and instead focus our holy attention upon only one place, that one place will be lost along with all else as the earth continues to be corrupted and may be eventually uninhabitable. Let us do Avodat Hashem, service to God, in our time in a way that builds for the future while acknowledging the past and attending to the present. Shabbat Shalom.